Start. And for the last while, we've been starting off, before we continue on to new parts of the text, by just doing a little bit of contemplative meditation on something we recently covered in the text. So that we could do that again today. And we're up to the section on the 9 similes for Buddha nature. So that we could just use one of the similes today, or to contemplate a few minutes. And so that's when it says, I'll read the verse. So the first verse says, just like an inexhaustible treasure lies in the earth under the house of a poor man, he does not know it. And so I'll just stop there. So if we're going to contemplate this, and we think, okay, so it's an analogy, we could start with it as an analogy for ourselves. So that experience, right, of being poverty is here a simile for various things. We'll leave it as for being in samsara. So the point, in a way, is that we have all kinds in our life, actually, of suffering. And that suffering that we have, that happens, is connected to our mental afflictions and karma. So the mental afflictions, right, like ignorance, like craving, desire, right, like anger, hatred, pride, jealousy, and so on. And you actually, with these similes, it's useful actually to imagine, right? So in other words, when somebody's really suffering, uh, like they're describing, right, in poverty, it can feel hopeless. It can feel frightening. It can feel upsetting. And so we relate to that, right? In other words, yeah, I have those kinds of experiences, times where things seem very difficult. Mm. Or desperate. Maybe that's the word. It can seem like that, so in a simile, you think of it can feel desperate. And life in samsara can seem desperate, our experience can be desperate, right? When somebody we care about is dying or has died, or when we face an illness or loss of a job or various kinds of circumstances that happen. Mm. And then this poor person, doesn't know that there's an inexhaustible treasure right underneath his house, right? Like right under the earth, inside his house, just under the floor. It's a humongous treasure, but he doesn't know it's there. And the verses say, the treasure doesn't call out and say, "Hey, I'm here," and he's not aware of it being there. And simile here is that we, like that, have within our being the solution to our problems, but we don't know it's there. And so we tend to look elsewhere to solve our problems. Usually we look outside of ourselves to some for some external solution. Mm. And in this simile, then so the person who's suffering from poverty doesn't know, like they're actually suffering terribly. They don't know that there's a treasure there. The treasure can't tell them that it's there. So the person continues suffering, kind of desperate. And then uh, someone who knows, right? Someone who's wise, someone who's aware, tells them there's a treasure there. And that's similarly for the Buddha, actually, Maitreya. We're here in this text, right, telling us. So this is that moment, actually, right? Like, so you actually, if you're taking this as a contemplative meditation, then you feel actually, okay, this is that moment, right? In other words, I could go on endlessly not knowing the treasure's there. The treasure can never tell me it's there. It's not how treasure works. So, but then if somebody tells you that you have that treasure there, then there's the opportunity to solve that problem, to no longer be desperate. And so here it's similes that the Buddha is telling us, you don't need to look someplace else. And it's not just a small treasure, it's an inexhaustible treasure. So the simile here is that you have Buddha nature. The precious treasure enclosed within your mind, as the text is. The ultimate nature of your mind is clear light, is empty of inherent existence. So therefore, you can become Buddha, a fully enlightened being. The Buddha is aware that one point he was the same as you, but he awakened to that potential in himself, became a Buddha. And so out of compassion, he's telling you, you also have that potential. And then the Buddha is also pointing something out to us and through this text, which is not only do you have that potential for enlightenment, but all beings have that potential. So all the suffering that you and go through, and all the suffering you see others go through, on the one hand, it is an experience, right? Just like the person in poverty. It's not pretending it doesn't exist, right? That person was suffering from poverty. Just so, right? Like you yourself do suffer, others do suffer, sometimes terribly. And yet the solution to that suffering is right there, very close. It's not far away. It's not outside of you, it's not outside of others. You just have to uncover it. Since through this contemplation, we just take another moment, we'll just cultivate a sense of, can, to the extent you're comfortable or willing, to cultivate a sense of compassion, actually, for yourself and for others. If this is true, right, and if there's an inexhaustible treasure within the nature of my mind, I'd like to uncover it. And if that exists in the mind of others, if it's all their suffering, then I'd like to help them uncover it. And so that kind of compassion is the purpose of study, right? It's the purpose of engaging with this material. So it's to free ourselves and others from suffering. And the approach being taught in this Tara Tantra text, Sublime Continuum, is that the way to alleviate our own suffering and other suffering isn't something, the ultimate solution, let's call it that, is not external, but is in the nature of your own mind and in the nature of each being's mind. Is that Tathagata Garbha, that essence of one thus gone, yeah, Buddha nature, potential for full enlightenment. And even, as we said last time, even when you're feeling miserable, even when you're feeling angry, even when you're feeling overwhelmed with craving for something, that that treasure is no less there. It's still there, completely present, just hidden, like the treasure under the earth. So your anger or your pride, your jealousy, that's just like the earth that's covering over. But hidden underneath it all the time is that inexhaustible treasure. Nothing you do destroys that, remains there, ready to be uncovered. Well, this kind of wish, may I be able to uncover that, to benefit myself and to help others. In particular, to help others uncover that treasure within there. With that in mind, I'll just do it once, the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. I'll go slowly through it. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of generosity and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And so just mentioned, like I said last time, we're going through these 9 similes for Buddha nature, and we're up to the 6th one next. And the way this text goes, I said there are different ways you can cover it, but I want to cover it the way Maitreya teaches it, which is kind of he goes over the 9 in a kind of general way, and then he gets at the specific symbolism of different parts of the metaphor, of the similes, that each one has its own. You can take them in general the way he does it this first round, but then he teases out different parts of practice by saying, this part of the simile can symbolize this and so on. So we'll do it the way he does it. But the 6th of the similes is the seed within the seed of a fruit. So he says, just as the seed within the fruit of a mango or similar tree has the indestructible potential of becoming a seedling, and relying on plowed earth and water will gradually grow into a majestic tree. So also within the skin of the fruit of ignorance, and so on, of sentient beings lies the virtuous Dharma Dhatu. So I'll just pause there, right? So here the simile and the symbol itself, right, is that if you think of like a seed, like a mango, papaya, something like that, um, an apple seed would work just as well, or any fruit seed, right? There's an outer skin, right, that covers it over, and so here that what he's saying is that skin symbolizes um, the mental afflictions, ignorance in particular. Is one mentioned here, uh, and sort of, thinking like I was thinking of my friends in the backyard have a humongous walnut tree, right? And when the walnuts fall, right, it's like I was starting to think of that because like that skin is harder, right? So that maybe that's more like me here. Some fruit, some of them have harder skins, but they all have a skin. But then within that, right, you wouldn't think. My point is that you wouldn't think if you looked at all those walnuts like laying on the ground that just one of them could produce something as huge as that gigantic tree. Um, and so that's what this one's getting at, right? That that potential for for something, and that then that tree can produce so many fruits, right? Millions of fruits over years and years. Um, right. So so the simile here, right, is that outer skin that you can't see what's inside, right? You don't know that there's the potential. You wouldn't necessarily think that when you first see it. Um, So that outer skin is a symbol for ignorance or the other mental afflictions, but then the actual fruit, the seed itself, is the symbol for Buddha nature, right? That it can develop into, just as a seed can develop into a tree, this Buddha nature within us can develop into an actual Buddha. And so that's where he says, but similarly, by relying on virtue, the basic element, meaning Buddha nature, will gradually transform into the essence of a majestic conqueror. And part of the point here that he's getting at is actually interesting meta simile. And there are a lot of elements to it you contemplate and that's what these are for, by the way, right? You sit and think about them, you contemplate them. And so part of that is like, it's funny. I'm gonna stick with, I mean, he's using mango, but I'm gonna use the walnuts for a second. Because actually when I remember one time I was at my friend's house and they had all fallen, so it was like or like they were sort of, I mean, not upset or anything, but they were sort of like, oh, this is gonna be a lot of work. I've got to clean up all these walnuts and it's all over the place, and um like a slight annoyance, right? And sometimes we relate to people that we don't, like we can see all these people and go, oh, they're annoying, they're difficult to deal with, and we don't see. The point is what the Buddha is getting at is when we're feeling that way, we don't see that each maybe think of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He was like that teacher who passed away. You could have that sense. He would look at like each person as so precious. And I would watch them. I remember like watch somebody like kind of being obnoxious around him, and he'd be like looking at them like they're the most precious person, like the most precious person in the world. The way like, sometimes you'll see like a parent do that, right? If their kid could be being kind of obnoxious, maybe if they're a certain age, and then the parent is like looking with so much love. He was like that with everybody, So like he would be walking down the street and some person would be acting rudely to him, and he would be looking at them like they were a precious jewel, because he related like this, right? He related to them as, that outer, and it's like, what is, we can't, don't look by its covers. I mean, you only see the outside, right? We see what we see, right? In the walnut thing, like we only see the shell. And that's part of the simile here, right? When ordinary people when we look at ourselves and at others, what we mostly see actually is either mental afflictions or that which comes from mental afflictions, right? And what we don't see is that beneath that is this amazing potential, this amazing, not just, but it is a potential, but it's also an essence, actually, is a garbha. Tathagata garbha is the Sanskrit word for Buddha nature, right? And garbha can mean seed, it can mean womb, it can mean, but it can also mean essence, right? So it's another way of thinking of it. Like, so we see the outer shell and we don't see the essence. And the essence of ourselves and of each being is precious, is infinitely precious, is what this is saying. Right. So it's recognizing that we look at ourselves and others the wrong way sometimes. We focus on the wrong thing. And this simile is also getting at this, which we'll get into more later, right? It says by relying on virtue. So part of the idea here is that, you know, if you want that nut or seed, fruit seed, to grow into something like a tree, right? It requires water, earth, sunlight, so on. And the simile here, right, also it says by relying on virtue, right? So in other words, that just as, if you have if you have a fruit seed, it won't grow unless you plant it, right? And so in a similar way, if we want our own Tathagata garbha, our own Buddha nature to grow and to flourish, then we have to create the right causes and conditions for that to happen. It's, in other words, which means practicing the Dharma. And here it'll say that just as by way of the conditions, water, sunlight, air, earth, time, and space, trees grow from within the peels of the mango and coconut fruits. Coconuts like that, it's a hard exterior. Similarly, the seed and sprout of complete enlightenment enclosed within the peel of sentient beings' afflictions through the conditions of such and such virtues will increase the realizations of Dharma. And below where it says such and such, it mentions the virtues of listening, contemplating, and meditating.
Just can I go on that one? I was walking through the forest last week, a part of the forest that had burned. You remember how last year there were a lot of fires out there? And this was total scorched earth. There were some really beautiful lady slippers coming up through it and stuff, and beautiful plants, but there's some seeds that require fire to germinate. They won't germinate. So I'm really excited to see plants that are new, that I've not ever seen before, because it requires fire. And this just makes me think about the I know parents about what have children who are going through really bad times, and they're really hard to relate to, and they're like, I can't talk to that kid anymore. And I share my history, which is, I was not a big kid, and my history is sometimes will give them hope. And I think that that's the same with the fire and the seeds. I think it's, sometimes you have to go through the fire, but then there's still all the room in the world to be born and come out beautiful.
Oh, beautiful point. And it implies something too, which is sometimes hard to see, isn't it? Is that in a way, like, it's true actually, that because it says that in the text, right? Nothing. In the first simile, he says, Maitreya says, that even beings in the lowest hell have Buddha nature. Right? And the point is, nothing can destroy, right? There's no fire that can destroy this, because it's the essence, it's the indestructible essence of who beings are. So there is no fire that can destroy that. Yeah, just waiting for the right, yeah. I think you're right, that's part of the implication. Beautiful. Well, then this last part, it gets at the right conditions thing, right? Where it says sentient beings afflict. So one point, I guess, like two different points, right? One is similarly the seed and the sprout of the tree grows. Then it says similarly the seed and the sprout of complete enlightenment close within the peel of sentient beings' afflictions, right? So one point is what I was saying earlier. He's making this point. He says that, right? Our beings' afflictions is just a peel, and so just note for yourself, right? I mean, again, it's a symbol, right? But how would that be? In other words, if when you see somebody who's prideful, hateful, whatever. You know, if how you related was like this, right? It was like looking at them going, oh, that's the peel. Uh, you know, that's just the peel. It's not the essence of who anybody is, myself or anybody else. Right? And because sometimes we feel like that's the essence of who we are also. You know, we get caught up in some misidentification as if whatever our afflictions are the essence of who we are. Just saying, no, that's just whether it's yourself or somebody. And actually, the tricky thing is if you do that with others, you're going to also do it with yourself, right? There's if you think, oh, this person's so terrible and that's all they are, then on some level, you could be that. You know, then like you don't know it about yourself. Because actually, one of the teachings is, you know, when a bodhisattva sees directly their own Buddha nature, then they see that when they come out of that, they naturally relate to others by seeing their Buddha nature. Right. So the more you see the Buddha nature in yourself, the easier it is to see it in others. The more you sort of, and the opposite would be true, the more you block yourself from seeing it in others, the harder it's going to be to see it in yourself. So it's a practice, right? To see it as just the peel is one point. But then the other point here in this verse is where it says, you know, so you need the water, the sunlight, and so on. You know, it's fun. A lot of times, like we want, you know, it is what we do, isn't it? Sometimes we're like, it's easier to say, so, oh, this person should have this and that. You know, they need this and that to become better. But of course, the person we can most control the circumstances for is ourselves, not somebody else. You know, and I had a Tibetan friend who used to say that that's not common. It's a cliche almost, right? What do you say when you point a finger at somebody else, there are three pointing back at you? It was my friend used to say that. He was an older Tibetan guy. But part of the point here is like, so, you know, that if you recognize you have this potential, right, then you have to, that your task is to create the right causes and conditions for your own Buddha nature to sprout and grow. And, you know, so what are they saying? They're saying the essence of that is virtue, right? Which particularly they list the example in the footnote of listening to the teachings, contemplating them, and meditating on them. And it can also there are other virtues, right? Going out and helping people and doing other, you know, doing various kinds of cultivating love and cultivating compassion. Well, those would be meditation. But various actions that help awaken our Buddha nature. So you get the simile here. And you get the point here. Each one has its own, I don't know, we'll get into it more later, but you can contemplate, they're for contemplation, right? And I find them quite helpful personally, like to come back to these similes at different times. I'll do one more and then I'll pause and see if there are questions. So the seventh one, right, the seventh of the nine, starts with a statue of Tathagata, right? So a statue of the Buddha made of precious jewels is wrapped in a tattered, foul-smelling, in tattered, foul-smelling robes. And it says, a divine being, but not God, like the creator God, but a divine God or something like a being who can see more. Having seen it lying on the road makes it known to a passerby so that it might be rescued. Right. So here the simile, right, is that it's like so you imagine this. It's like actually a lot of these similes, I think they're like gosh, they're kind of like a scene in an old movie or something. I don't know, like right. So because the idea here is that like, you know, so you imagine that like time immemorial ago, somebody made this incredible, you know, it would be like a fantasy movie almost or something, right? Like it's like somebody made a magical statue of jewels and gold, right, of the Buddha. And it was the most gorgeous statue, like incredibly valuable, made with diamonds and, you know, embedded with diamonds and rubies and sapphires and made of gold. And somebody wrapped it in a cloth as they were traveling, right? But it fell out of their satchel and fell into the, you know, fell down a ravine or something. And it laid there for centuries. Right. This is the outer robes that were sort of are now kind of worn out and have holes in them. It's foul smelling because it stinks because all kinds of stuff has fallen on it, right? And so that's the scene. You know, you're almost imagining this is like the scene you're seeing, right? And one point it's getting at here, again with the simile, right? The statue of the Tathagata that's infinitely precious is this like mystical object, right? This beautiful object, this valuable object. And one point that's being gotten at is like, although it's laid there for decades or centuries, it's made of gold and jewels. So in other words, they don't get less valuable, right? Like, so it didn't lose its value. It's just unseen. Nobody knows it's there, but it's just as, what's the word, amazing. It's because our Buddha nature doesn't get sort of tarnished, is the simile here. But then it's covered up in these tattered rags and so on, right? And now here, this divine being knows it's there, right? Because they can see, right? So they tell somebody. So, to, hey, go unwrap that, wash it off, and you'll have something amazing. Right? So it's the meaning, right? The one endowed with unobstructed vision, right? Meaning the Buddha here, that sees the Tathagata essence covered in the multitudes of afflictions, even in animals. Right. So that's the simile, right? Is that just as that divine being can see that the statue's there and can tell somebody, right? When the Buddha says even animals, right? We even an insect has Buddha nature. That's the idea, right? Even any, and part of that, I think, one is that's Buddhist view. The other is, I think it's sometimes helpful because what's the word, like, when you're feeling discouraged in your own practice, you can remember, well, Shantideva uses that, I think, at one point in his text, where he kind of says, like, if even an insect has Buddha nature, like a spider, then how can you lose hope? You have more capacity for doing something to awaken your Buddha nature right now. So you are equal. You and the spider have equal Buddha nature. You're equal in having Buddha nature, but you're closer to having the conditions, right, to awaken yours. So you can't lose hope. Recognize there's a capacity. And so and again, like, what do? We often identify with, but when we're looking at ourselves, for example, we often identify with the smelly old robes rather than recognize the Buddha within. So this is saying, those tattered old robes are, and this is a point made last class, those tattered old rotting robes are adventitious, they're temporary, right? They're like they're falling apart already in this metaphor, which has a meaning they get to, but so all you have to do is take them off, right? And you'll see the beautiful golden bejeweled Buddha statue within. So like when we have our mental afflictions, you don't think they're who I am, or they're permanent, or they're not in the nature of your mind. They're not intrinsic to your mind. They can be removed from your mind, is the idea here, right? And what will be left behind is the clear light nature of your mind, the emptiness of your mind, which can become the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. So that's the simile here, right? And it says, so for the sake of liberation, the Buddha, in order to liberate beings, the Buddha shows the method. Just as one with the divine eye sees the image of the Tathagata, precious by nature, wrapped in foul-smelling robes, lying on the road, and shows it to people so that they might rescue it. Likewise, the conqueror sees the basic element, wrapped in the tattered robes of the afflictions, lying on the road of samsara. Interesting simile. Which exists even in animals, and teaches the Dharma so that they might be liberated. Right. And so I just want to suggest something again. I did this a little bit last time, but I want to suggest, like, it's easy to sort of relate to this text as a text, which it is, it's sort of shallow, but try for a moment relating to it, like, where it says, one with the divine eye is telling beings, right? That's, I mean, what I suggest is this is to relate to it as though that's you right now on the road of some, because actually we are on the road of samsara, is Buddhist view, right now we're on the road of samsara. And you can actually think of me like I'm like the person who, like, the whatever, if the divine being gave somebody a note, some ignorant person a note, and said, hey, I'm the one passing you the note. So somebody, hey, Maitreya gave me this note for you. Here you go. Right. And that note says, right there where you are is the Tathagata, is this golden statue, is this infinitely precious mystical object. It's just covered up. There is, because where it says, just like that, the conqueror sees the basic element wrapped in the tattered robes of the mental afflictions. It's saying that's you right now. That's what this text is saying, right? That's you in this moment. And those robes are what you see because they're on the outside, right? So you see your own imperfections. That's fine. But right this moment within them is that golden statue, that statue. Because that's what these metaphors, these similes come from the Buddha, actually, right? I said that from the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. It's a particular sutra of the Buddha. So the Buddha taught these similes, right? And they're a way the Buddha is trying to help us see that we have that now within us. So where it says even animals will, he teaches the Dharma so that they may be liberated. This is that Dharma, right? And those beings are us, actually, and even animals can awaken to that, and it's easier for us to. So we should do that. I'll just pause there before I go on. There are two more, but any questions or comments?
The judge had close quarrel, he was closest to the boot of anyone of them, and he did criminal law. So as a judge, he would recognize criminal. He wanted to do criminal law. So there was a guy who was convicted of some criminal act. And he came back to the judge 20 years later and he said, I want to tell you, you didn't send me to jail. And I've made a good life for myself and it's due to you. And so it was like so touching that the judge had recognized that putting him in prison would not help the situation and that he could make it. And 20 years later, he came back and thanked him. And of course, the judge didn't remember the guy, so many people, but he recognized something.
Wow. It's beautiful. I think part of what you're implying, which this text is about, is that we're not judge, we're not all, we all have different paths and different jobs, different roles, but that we can do our own version of that, whoever in our sphere, right, to be the person who looks for and sees what's the positive potential and tries to be skillful, as this judge was. How do you help? What do you do? Yep.
I was just gonna say along the same lines, for me, that when I taught in mundane school, that was the whole thing about, I always had an attitude that, once you learn how to read and write, here's a book, do your thing, but it's really human development and not, one of my things was I was really blessed because these weren't my kids. They were my class. I didn't have that kind of attachment to them. So I could see a little bit more clearly, not all the time. Some of them I just, but some of them taught me a lot. But it's the same thing. It's really about viewing the potential and encouraging that, and maybe not even seeing the results of it ever, or until someone comes back and says, you said this, and this is the effect it had on. Kind of thing. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think in everyone's life, and they know what they're doing. It's hard being a parent. Because you're automatically attached. There's nothing you can do. Forever.
Let's talk about mosquitoes.
First time dream.
So I can't remember if it was always over or His Holiness was joking you know, and so the first time, you know, I pray for them, the second time I prayed for them, the third time.
That's it.
And I know he's joking and stuff like that, but. But, you know, they carry, you know, they can cause diseases in you now, and, you know. I see your good nature. You know, maybe next time, and come back, we do. I don't know. How to do that.
I remember that story. It was his whole.
Oh, yeah.
What's this whole this?
Yeah. But repeated probably, but
Actually, I was, you know, that story is just nice, and it was reminding me, actually. Lamas Overshay, I was thought you were saying, there was another, Lamas Overshay used to, Roger Kunsang used to tell stories of Lamas where he would, there were somewhere where there were a lot of mosquitoes, and he was sitting outside on purpose because he thought they were hungry.
oh, yeah.
Just let him
He would let them eat, yeah,
Yeah.
and he would do the same thing with those
Right.
bugs who would come in your, robes. And he would cut out part of the robe and like create a little terrarium. for them.
Right. It doesn't sound like this.
It was
boy
his
has a sense of
birthday,
humor.
his sense of humor is more like Lamas Overshay wouldn't joke.
No,
But I think the important part here is to, you know, from this text perspective, let's stick with that, like, actually, I guess I'll say it this way, like, whatever you do behaviorally, that's not coming on that right now, but actually, if you contemplate what this text is saying, right, like, then you would think, actually, like, that a mosquito, right, has the Buddha nature, but is due to the karma and mental afflictions, is stuck in a body, the nature of which is that, like, imagine that, actually, it's horrifying, isn't it? Like, that without control, you have no ability to control yourself, and all you can do to survive is bite some, you know, is drink, is have the blood of somebody else. And actually, I mean, part of the purpose of this text, right, would be to develop that if you contemplate that way, you think, oh wow, so I see the external, which is this kind of form that's like that.
potential
Is that you would develop-
diseases to really cause diseases.
And can harm others and so on, right? Is that you would develop compassion. In that sense, right, for the being who's reborn as a mosquito. That's all, like, so you would, the purpose of this, you know, of contemplating that way would be to develop a sense of compassion for the mosquito as a being. You know, what you know, I guess you probably put all the stuff, well, you must have all that stuff though, you spray on Sheila has all that stuff, but she's always putting on all this
Right.
stuff that then they don't want to bite you or something. So I assume you do that, and yeah, that might be. But the attitude, I guess the point is like, actually, maybe the one important part for this text point is you know, because when you take the bodhisattva vow, right, the vow of the bodhisattva, I'll achieve enlightenment, I'll strive, you know, I'll do the practices to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. You know, one point they make there is, you know, if you which you're not doing, I'm not saying you're doing this, but if in your heart you completely leave even one being out, then you're not, then you're giving up your vow in that sense, right, of the bodhisattva. So that's, I think, a key point is like, from an inner perspective, you know, that's part of the practice and part of why we contemplate this is that, right? It's connected to the bodhisattva vow. It's this sense of not leaving anyone out of our compassion, even a mosquito. So yeah, that's, but in the, yeah, so I mean, does that make sense? It's the inner part that I'm focused on.
The
I-
smashing it, I mean, you know, is that like helping it along the way?
Yeah. It would be.
I don't know. Yeah, that I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
What kind of karma is that to come here so far? I mean. I'm thinking of mosquito, they don't live very long. No, but I mean, really, they don't, yeah, but I mean, what it brought to mind was what kind of karma? I can't kind of get the cats and the dogs, but what kind of karma is it to come back as a mosquito? What exactly, what virtuous action was accumulated. And when you go like that, yeah, are you helping that being along? Or are you just becoming part of the web of, you know, consciously kind of killing and knowing that because of that, you're manipulating? It's very tricky.
Well, and I mean, I guess one point I'll make is, you know, I mean, you're getting a different point. This is the thing I put in nature, but you're getting a different point, which is karma, right? And I guess at one point is, you know, the main factor in karma is one's intention. You know, so you know, so you have to check, I guess, so you have to check what's your intention and then what's the action, you know, and so like when they give the example of killing, right? The intention, and if the intention is, there are different intentions you can have, but people can kill out of ignorance or out of hatred or out of attachment. And then if you're killing out of any of those three, you know, so if you're killing, let's say if we're out of hatred, that's worse, but if it's out of attachment, that's still a karma of killing and so on. So that's one point I would make, is you have to check actually what's my intention. And so if my intention, let's say if my intention is attachment, and then out of attachment, I kill a being, then that's definitely a negative karma. So you have to check what's my intention. Actually, that's the only, with any, that's my point, you have to check what's the intention and then what's the action. And then you know the quality of the karma you're creating, because it comes with you. Karma is ultimately the intention and then the action that comes from it. Yeah. And then John after this. Yes.
You know, there's a lot of philosophy around that you can't denigrate animals' life because they live less long. Peter Schmidt did a lot of work on this, and he said we justify killing and eating animals because they have a short life, which is true. So we think they look at life differently because they don't have as long life as we do, which is absolutely true. However, it's still a life.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then it creates more obscurations, which makes it harder to dig into where Buddha nature would reveal itself. See, I brought it back.
Yeah. I'll just say one last comment, and then I was making me remember when I was very first getting interested in Buddhism, actually, and Professor Jan Willis was my teacher at undergraduate. I was an undergraduate, so I was young, and I was in a seminar, so we were sitting around like a small, you know, like one of those seminar tables, and she was lecturing about Buddhism, or I don't remember what she was talking about that day. But while she was lecturing, like a mosquito I was sitting next to her, I guess, and I watched a mosquito land on her hand, and I had never known anybody in my life up to that point who wouldn't immediately kill it. And I was aware that she was still lecturing, so she didn't stop. Like, in other words, she wasn't paying attention. Like, so it was like a normal, and without any thought, she picked up her watch because it was on the table where you could, like, so she could see when class was going to end. And she was still lecturing, and she was gently nudging the mosquito, like very gently, and then it left, you know, it flew off her hand. And I was like, I don't know what she was talking about in that moment, but I was like, what did she just do? Who does that? I was like, what in the world? Like, she was so gentle, like tapping it, you know, on the side, like its leg, like the way you would, like, if, you know, if your friend were somewhere and you were like, oh, excuse me, I have to get by, or, you know, like if your loved one were there and you were like, oh, excuse me, I have to do this, like with so much respect. And I was like, I just had never seen anybody who respected a mosquito before. So I was like, I was dumbfounded. I think I stopped paying attention to what she was saying because I was like, oh, that's weird.
That's what it was.
But yeah, I got it was one of really good teaching I got from her that day. Just was that unconscious action. I mean, it was conscious, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't her main focus. She was talking about something quite complex. She's a professor, and I remember that. But John has a hand up. Sorry, John.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I was especially drawn to that simile about the person living in poverty, not knowing that this treasure is, you know, under their feet. And of course, the house being, you know, a representation of the person's being, and that treasure being in their own mind. And But and I wanted to get your thoughts and maybe others on this, but I'm not sure how significant it is, but there's a part in it, and I'm not recalling if this is in the actual scripture or maybe in Kelso J's commentary, but this notion that, the poor person doesn't know the treasure is there, and the treasure can't call out and say, I'm here, just come and, reveal me. But because in the, again, either in the scripture or the commentary, it states that one of the proofs of our Buddha nature is that we have this longing, to know something, that we have a sense of it being the ultimate good. So I think that to the extent that we have this longing, this yearning to reach something that, we don't have a clear notion of it, the clarity of that notion, of course, varies, person to person. But nonetheless, there is some cognizance, of its reality. So it's not like we're oblivious to the reality of that ultimate nature of ourselves. So that I don't know, maybe it's too much quibbling, but it seems like a bit of a contradiction to me to say that on the one hand that we're oblivious to the treasure, and on the other we do have that sense of yearning, that longing to realize what we have some notion of being our ultimate good.
Make two quick points. One is I think it's interesting reflection, but one point is that that particular, the treasure under the earth, we'll say that I'll get into this more later in the text, but there are different correspondences to the similes in a way, and that one, the treasure is said to be to represent our naturally abiding Buddha nature, which so one meaning of like can't call out, you could say. One is, the Buddha nature doesn't literally call out, of course, but one way of thinking about it is that since the naturally abiding Buddha nature is an emptiness, a non-affirming negation, philosophically speaking, it's not a functioning thing, so it can't literally, it's like space that allows for things to happen, but it's not actually something that can perform an action from its own side or something like that. So one meaning is that like it can't perform actions. That's the one way of taking that, I think. Like like space, space allows things to grow, but space can't say, please grow. Space creates the room where things can grow into it, but it can't say, oh, now you should grow here or something like that, because space doesn't function that way, and the naturally abiding Buddha nature doesn't. That's one way I think we can think about that, in my view, I guess. And then I guess the other though is when you were talking about the longing, in a way, let's see if there, like, I guess, well, maybe I'll ask you, are you referring, like, because obviously, like, as we cultivate the tree, speaking that, using that matter, as we cultivate as our Buddha nature awakens, let's say, or we become more cognizant of it, then there's a clear, it's healthy to have that longing, isn't it? And it becomes stronger along, and there can be different versions of it, longing for liberation, longing for full enlightenment. But actually, I guess as I'm thinking about it, the more covered over one's Buddha nature is, sometimes the less, isn't it? If the less one has that, so the more impoverished you are, in a sense, or the more your Buddha nature is covered over, the less there is even a sense of longing for something more, for example. So I just, that's at least my own reflection.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
So I think, the more we become cognizant of our potential, the more we, and so on, then of course we have more of that healthy longing for something. But But yeah, for sure, right, there are beings who kind of, where it's so covered over, they wouldn't think to have belonging even.
Certainly insects and so on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's a human bias, but they don't seem to be cognizant at all. But
No, I'm not sure mosquito. I don't imagine.
yeah, I always think about ticks. You know, they're especially where I live now. They're just
Wow.
everywhere. Cultivating compassion for them is quite a challenge.
Eh,
Well, it is like instinctual. I mean, well, matter we, taking, it isn't, I feel bad.
The 2 times I've been bitten, it was like, "Hey, go get the magic pill." Don't walk in high ground.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about the relationship between uncovering Buddha nature and then the practice of realizing emptiness. Are they the same? How are those two related?
What am I saying? Well, you think of it this way, like we say you can categorize Buddha nature into 2 types, right? There's the naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is the ultimate nature of our own mind, which is emptiness. And then there's what they call the developing Buddha nature, which is like the currently existing positive tendencies or traits that we can increase, like the current level of love, for example, that we can increase. So I guess one point is, like, in terms of uncovering our Buddha nature, I mean, you could say that the realization of the ultimate nature of your own mind, its emptiness, is the realization of your Buddha nature. So in that sense, the realization of emptiness is the seeing of your Buddha nature, especially when the what's the word, basis of emptiness is your own mind, in particular. But then I guess what I would say is, and that supports for sure the development of other good qualities, so it would help you develop the developing Buddha nature qualities are certainly assisted by that. And at the same time, you could say, though, that because there is a developing Buddha nature, that that you wouldn't want to say that that's the only way to, like, so for example, just because if somebody develops more loving kindness, let's say, or compassion, that is sort of enhancing their developing Buddha nature. But in the end, you have to realize your naturally abiding Buddha nature, the empty nature of your own mind. That's in some ways the most important to really progress on the path, because you can progress through the various stages and so on. So I think it's the main, you could say it's probably one of the most important ways. And it's a practice that is realizing your Buddha nature, but then the developing Buddha nature would include other practices as well.
So is abiding Buddha nature emptiness?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Of your mind, yeah. The empty nature, yeah, the ultimate nature of your own mind, its emptiness, is your naturally abiding Buddha nature.
I'm trying to put my hands up, but it doesn't work.
Oh, go ahead. You could just go ahead.
What that was John was talking about, the longing. I know I was 20 years old when I told my dad, I have to get out of this house because I want to know who I am. And that has stuck with me forever, because there was a certain recognition that's what I needed to do. So that was sort of my karma. And that has helped me along the way. So you don't know what it is, but you know what you want. So I just want to share because it had helped me.
And that was your karma, wasn't it? To from some that longing for you had that very strongly, didn't you?
That's what I wanted to say.
That's beautiful. Thanks. Thank you. Do another similar. See. Oh, so the next one. Again, this one, I said some of the other ones. This one also seems to me, it seems like a scene in a epic fantasy movie or something. So in this one, and again, you're imagining being this person, you're imagining being, being both parts here. So it says, just as an unsightly woman, vulnerable and residing in an unprotected dwelling. So the image here is you're imagining like it again, it's like you imagine in some it's it's written at a different time. So you're imagining but it's now too. But so what you're imagining here is that this woman, it's a young woman who's pregnant and totally in poverty, has no money at all, and is disheveled. So it says unsightly. It means like she's like wearing kind of, she barely has clothes, like she has to wear, but they're like old and dirty, right? And so you pause and she's in and where it says unprotected dwelling, I mean like she's like in like she's homeless, right? So she ended up in like a under whatever, like under a little awning somewhere or something like that, right? And so one point I want to pause there. You can imagine the level of desperation, right? So if you're putting yourself in her shoes, right? You're imagining, wow, that would be like, you're desperate, you're going to have a child, but you don't even have enough to feed yourself or clothe yourself. You can't even protect yourself from the elements. And it would be, so you're imagining like a level of what? Terror, fear, overwhelm, whatever other emotions, right? And now this is the part that's like fantasy. You as the viewer of this scene know that in her womb, she's pregnant, a glorious king. It holds a glory that the baby, but she doesn't, that the baby she's pregnant with will someday be the most powerful king on that planet. Right. But she has no idea that, right? So she's just feeling utterly desperate, alone, sort of no family, no friends, and sort of. And so anyway, that's the context, right? So she is unaware of the Lord of humans within her. So she's unaware that within her womb, the person who's there is going to become the most powerful king that the planet ever knew. It says, likewise, birth in samsara is like an unprotected house. Impure sentient beings are like the pregnant woman. The undefiled basic element is like the king abiding within her. Those endowed with such will have protection. And so, so birth within samsara is desperate like that, right? Like the unprotected house. In other words, and what they're getting at with birth within samsara is like an unprotected house. It's part of the contemplation of the nature of samsara, isn't it? In other words, part of what we sort of say, right? Even if you have right now a protected house, if you're in samsara, you don't know it'll stay protected, right? In other words, we wish for permanence, but there is no permanence. Right? Natural disasters happen, fires happen, all kinds of things happen. Or your body itself, right? Be fine, and the next day find out you're dying. Happens all the time, doesn't it? So that's the nature of life within samsara, right? And so it's a terrifying, overwhelming, frightening situation, actually, to be in samsara. And then again, this metaphor, I said before, garbha, right? This Tathagata garbha, right? Can mean essence of a Buddha can also mean seed, and it can also mean womb, actually. So it's an interesting play on sort of word here. So the idea, right, is that, although we're wandering and vulnerable and struggling, within us, already now, right, is something that can sort of be born, and be very marvelous and powerful and beneficial. So it says, just as the woman of unappealing form, dressed in stained clothes, lives in an unguarded place, experiencing great suffering, even though she bears the Lord of the earth in her womb. Similarly, within sentient beings, there is a protector, but beings nonetheless abide in a state of suffering, their unprotected minds being restless by the force of the afflictions. So I think it's a pretty clear simile. And again, I guess one point is, for me anyway, this one, I think if you imagine it does get at somehow the feeling of desperate, if you in terms of the feeling of desperation for samsara, how scary that would be, upsetting that would be. I don't know what word even to use. It's not quite a word for it, but and part of the simile here, right, is that actually it's an interesting one, isn't it? I didn't think of it this way before. Like, if if you're the viewer of this story and you know that that child will be born, that child will become this sort of great, powerful being. So you say, right, it doesn't make the present easier, but it gives hope, doesn't it? It would give a kind of sense of, oh wow, okay, it's not gonna stay this way. Things are gonna get better. Anyway, that's how I take the simile in part. I guess I'm just saying is like some sense of, for ourselves, that when we're in samsara, to recognize already there is the potential for something better. The task is to nurture it, because part of the metaphor here is you have to, allow that fetus to be born and grow up, right? And then things will be better. How will you make things better is allow the child to be born and to grow, and then things, their karma will sort of lead to certain things that will then make things better. Anyways, it's a simile for our task in a way, which is to nurture our Buddha nature. And part of the implication here is that our task is to nurture our own Buddha nature, because then it will protect. And you get the metaphor here, like, in other words, we're identifying. We're not one, or in the simile, it can seem like it's two separate. Well, it's two separate people. It's a mother and a child. But the implication, in terms of the meaning of the simile, we're both, right? So we're the mother and we're also the child, right? But we identify with the mother part and not the child part, is what we're getting at. We identify with the desperate part and not with the potential that can be nurtured to become, and not a universal monarch, but an enlightened being. So the idea is you can be, I guess in the simile here, the idea would be that the child would eventually protect their mother. But the point is not that. The point here is, if we nurture our own Buddha nature that's already within us, then we will be safe. We will be protected by our own achievement of enlightenment. That's the idea, by that state. So that's that. And I'll do the ninth one too, and then pause again. So the last one is, just as having seen the flawless statue cast in gold inside a clay mold. So here the image, right, is, you can imagine like a actually, you can imagine that I find it helpful to imagine these scenes, right? So here you're imagining like a giant piece of clay, right? So you like walk in a room and there's this giant piece of clay there, and you might think, what's that? It looks kind of weird, maybe, right? And you don't know what it is, right? You just see a big, huge piece of clay. But there's a sculptor who knows that piece of clay is a mold, right? And that they've poured pure gold into that, and that they've made this gorgeous statue within it. So the sculptor knows, wow, if I go over and, once the gold has set, if I go in with my tools and knock away the chip away at the clay, then this beautiful golden statue will be evident. Somebody else who doesn't know about what was being done there might not know that, right? But either way, within that big clump of clay, there's this golden statue. That's the scene, right? So it says, having seen a flawless statue cast of gold inside a clay mold, the gold pure, but the outside the nature of clay. Those who understand this remove the outer contaminants in order to purify the gold therein. Right. So, and part of the point here is if you don't know, like, actually, if like, for example, if somebody had cast a golden statue inside of clay and then they passed away before they took the clay off, and you came across, you might think, oh, it's a bunch of clay, we just pass it by. Something you wouldn't pay any mind to it. Which is what we do to other people all the time. We don't see that there's gold within them, in a sense. Here, though, the task, right, is to be aware there's gold within, and then to remove the clay. That's our job, right? Ultimately, first with ourselves, not the first task is to do that in relation to yourself, to remove the outer clay. So likewise, seeing the stains covering the clear light nature are adventitious. Right, so here the point, or part of the point, is clay is, what's the word? Easier to chip away at. Right? And so the idea is that the clay is a simile for how our mental afflictions are temporary. They only arise due to causes and conditions. They're not permanent. They're not in the nature, they're separable from the gold. They're not in the nature, like gold is not in the nature of clay and clay is not in the nature of gold. You can separate them. In the same way, the nature of our mind is separable from the mental afflictions. They're temporary. They arose due to causes and conditions, which are past habituation, mostly, and we can remove them if we make effort. And the gold will remain. This is similarly there. The clay mantle of the precious gold, sentient beings, right? So it's clay covering the gold, precious gold and sentient beings. To purifying defilements attain supreme enlightenment. Just as goldsmith astutely perceives the undefiled, peaceful nature of shining golden statue fixed inside the clay mold and removes the clay from it, so too the omniscient one, knowing the peaceful mind to be like pure gold, purifies the defilements with the chisel of the Dharma teachings. So it's fairly clear image. And again, I just want to pause and I want to suggest something first, which is just a suggested homework assignment, which is to contemplate these images and these similes in relation to yourself. That's one point. And you'll see there are different each one has its own flavor, its own sort of feeling that comes across. In this one, right, it's emphasizing this point, right, that again, which is an interesting one. When you look at yourself, let's use ourselves as the example. Actually, how often, when you think, every day we just think, oh, I woke up today and I have to do this and I want to do that, and oh, this happened, and we think of ourselves in that sense. If you were to go back over your last week, how often were you thinking about the golden Buddha statue within, and how often was your focus on the clay? And how often did you even notice there was a Buddha statue within the clay? Is what this is an interesting contemplation from this simile, right? And what's the effect if all you ever focus on is the clay, right? Is the mental afflictions and others and things connected to them. And what would it be like, actually? It's an interesting question. In other words, if your focus, even for an hour, were on what's most important about you, what's most significant about you is not some particular external clay, it's that golden Buddha within, how would that change how you relate to yourself in your life? What would that be like? Is a question. I'm just suggesting something to contemplate. Does that make sense? For yourself. That's what this simile, I think, is getting at, is to ask those questions. To say, well, what would it be like if I related to myself that way? And if I related to these mental afflictions and what's connected to them as just temporary coverings, not as something terribly important, right? Because it's weird if you actually stop and think about it, how important, you know, like, I mean, I can think of, like, sometimes we can spend like, it's kind of funny, I mean, using this simile for, this is how I would reflect on myself. I would look back and go, oh my God, there are times where I spent like months worrying about like, well, is that clay like this? And what if the clay should be like that? And like, why is this thing next to that clay? And like, where the important thing is to just chip away at, is to like chip the clay off to get to what's behind it. And instead it was like, you know, wow, there's like a white swirl in the gray, and the, why is this part like that, brown and gray and black, you know, the colors of the clay, right? And like, why are they mixed like that? And I don't know, whatever, I'm using the simile for a second, right? But it's like all these details about, we focus on all these strange details about, you know, how the whatever, things connected to the mental afflictions, and never even stop to go, wow, they're just adventitious coverings of something deeper. That's what this is getting at in part, right? And sometimes it's that we don't know there's something deeper, some people, right? Or sometimes, or actually, I sometimes think it's worse if you know and then you don't. Like someone like, you know, for myself, for example, like I've read this text, like I've studied this, and but then if I forget, and I still only hyper focus on the clay, it's like really worse in some way. Like it's a bigger waste of an opportunity, at least. Doesn't harm the gold any, but it seems like a worse waste of time if you knew that the gold was there and then you were going, oh, do you like the way the clay is over? You know, it's sort of silly, isn't it? And so anyway, I was suggesting, so contemplate them is my suggested homework or something, because that way they become useful to sort of go, wow, how am I doing that? And again, what would it be like if I were focusing on the positive thing that's there deeper? And all these metaphors that are getting at something hidden underneath, right? There's something covering, and then there's something unseen or hidden that's behind what's covering. And that's, what am I missing? You know, it's like you can ask yourself, how am I missing in myself? What's most important, maybe?
And so I was thinking about, like, I like rocks, and so I would always, you know, collect rocks that I have are cool, and then I'd go home and smash them a lot of times to see, that I always wanted to find the beauty in the inside the rock, right? And so then I ended up with a whole bunch of smashed rocks around me, and I never found a single one with that precious inside. You know, is there, I mean, do you get distracted on that journey of looking for the preciousness inside and not? I don't know, I don't know how to express that, but can you get, is that like grasping for something, that something? When you keep looking and looking and looking and looking, and it's just not where you're looking.
I think you're getting an important point related to what this is getting at, which is like, actually, if you I'll use the similes to get it. I think what you're getting at, right? Which is, I mean, many of the not every single one, but most of the similes actually have in them, right? Here it's the goldsmith. So the goldsmith, like, there is, because like not all lumps of clay have a gold statue inside, but the goldsmith knows, right? Or in the one with the there's one with like the jewel under the house, right? There's a divine being who knows, oh, that house has a, you know, I mean, it's a simile to get at a point, right? And each time it says, in each of the similes, it points out, it says the divine being, or there's like one with somebody with X-ray vision, essentially, you know, sort of a divine eye, they call it, like, you know, who can see that there's something hidden. They're getting at a certain point there in the similes, which is, they'll say it, right? They'll say the goldsmith, or the divine being, or the being with the divine eye symbolizes the Buddha, who can see where to look. Like they tell the person, right? They say, oh, like, in other words, they're not saying go pick up every rag, like the one with the rags, right? The Buddha statue of gold and silver and diamonds in the rags. It's not saying go pick up every rag you find. It's saying a divine being sees, oh, inside those rags is. So I think the simile, if you take that part carefully, is that we don't, you know, beings who don't have that kind of vision don't know where to look. And so it's actually, the simile is saying, rely on the Buddha. And they're on this point, I mean, and a goldsmith will tell you where the gold statue is. And it's the Buddha, a Buddha will tell you where Buddha nature is. And so what they're saying, actually, in a way, what Maitreya is saying here is, that, so like that, that the Buddha's teachings will tell you where in your, because like if you were to look in the wrong part of your mind, for example, it's hidden in your mind. But yeah, you could, like people do that all the time, right? You could look in the wrong parts of your mind or in the wrong way in your mind, and you won't find what you're looking for. So what this text is saying, in a sense, is if it's Buddha nature, that's what the Buddha's specialty is, right? So rely on what the Buddha's explanation of the nature of mind, and then you'll know how to find, and if you look in like so, for example, like Lama Tsongkhapa makes in his teachings on emptiness, he makes this really big point about you have to find the object of negation in order to find the nature of emptiness, because empty means empty of something. What's it empty of? It's something we grasp at instinctually that isn't actually there. And so I think it's getting at your point in a deep way from a spiritual perspective. Is Lama Tsongkhapa actually says this. He says, if you don't identify the right thing that you're grasping at to then recognize the mind is empty of that, then you'll negate the wrong thing and you won't understand. It'll be like the person who smashed the rocks and didn't find something inside, in the sense that you have to know exactly where to look. And Lama Tsongkhapa goes to great effort in a number of his teachings to point out, this is how you identify exactly where to look, like at what you're then going to crack open. Like I'm using your metaphor for a second, right? The cracking open is analysis, a deep analysis of the ultimate nature. But you have to apply that analysis to the right place, is what Lama Tsongkhapa actually says, which is our innate grasping at an intrinsically existent self or intrinsically existent nature. And so Lama Tsongkhapa puts a lot of effort into saying, this is exactly how to identify that in your own experience. Then apply the reasoning to that, and you'll crack it open and find the golden statue. Otherwise, it'll be like that. Like you might crack open all different things and not find what you're looking for because you're not looking in the right place. So I actually think that you're raising a good point that the simile is addressing in this way of when you're looking for, for gold, rely on a goldsmith. When you're looking for Buddha nature, rely on the Buddha. It's the point about where in the nature of the mind is that, because
There's really arrogance.
Yeah, that would be a kind of arrogance, because we don't know. And that's part of the point, is like, until you've seen emptiness directly, we don't know, actually. We have to rely. And actually, it's simple, isn't it? It's like, in other words, say there, like, it's the same, it's a point in a way, but like, in other words, if somebody needed neurosurgery, they would rely on a neurosurgeon. They wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to do that on my own, like, it wouldn't work. That this is that it's a subtle point that's, so you don't, so you have to rely on the person who's trained in that. And then if you become trained in it, then of course, if you decide I want to become a neurosurgeon, then you can do neurosurgery, but still you wouldn't do it on yourself. So, it wouldn't be a very good idea. But the point is that, when it comes to emptiness, it has to be somebody who's realized emptiness in the end, who can point out the nature of mind, so I think, your point is quite good, actually, for what this is getting at.
Just in doing this exercise, I think I did just what you did with the rocks. I noticed, I think, okay, this is sort of sexist, the story of a woman who was unattractive, her worth is bearing a male child, right? So, and you alluded to it, that it was written a long time ago. But by focusing on that, I lost the point.
I'll share. I did the exact. The first time I read that simile or heard that simile, I did the exact same thing. In other words, I was like, "Oh, wait a second." Well, I had this like, and then I was like, I had to stop and go, "Oh, wait a second. I'm that woman." Like I only got it when I was like, as a male, particularly going, "Oh, wait, I was getting it wrong." I was thinking, "Oh, this is about gender," and I did the same thing, and I was like, "Oh, I'm the woman." Like, in other words, I didn't get that. Like, I'm the young pregnant, in the simile.
Or it may be sexist, focusing on a woman who's unattractive, bearing a male child. But
Yeah.
that's not the point of the simile.
No.
So it's like looking at rocks that aren't.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah.
underneath.
Yeah, and it's just a simile. Exactly. Yeah. Great point. Great catch. Yes. Good
It's
catch.
okay.
Have to catch ourselves. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just, we have 5 minutes. I'll read this one last part, the summary, and then we're gonna get into so there's a brief summary here, and then there's the individual explanations of the phenomena illustrated by the similes. That will start next time. That's gonna get it, like each part of the simile can symbolize a particular mental affliction, a particular set of mental afflictions, or each of the valuable things can symbolize, like, for example, one symbolizes natural Buddha nature, others symbolize the developing Buddha nature, and so on. So they get it different. If you want to contemplate these, there are ways of sort of teasing out things to contemplate in the similes, which are interesting. But here it just says, the summary. So it says, the similes of the obscuring phenomena are within a decaying lotus, a swarm of bees. These are the things that obscure, right, in these 9. So it's the decaying lotus, the swarm of bees, the husk, the filth, the earth, the peel of the fruit, the tattered robes, the woman's womb, or the clay mold. And then that which is obscured were the Buddha, the honey, the kernel, the gold, the treasure, the tree, the precious statue, the wheel-turning king, or the golden image. So it's just summarizing. Those are the 9 things that are obscure. Those are the 9 things that are obscured. And then it says, just as the afflictions neither exist by way of their own nature, nor are they in the nature of mind. That's really important. That's why that part's worth covering, right? So, in other words, our mental afflictions in any given moment, right? So our pride, our anger, our desire, and so on, afflicted desire, right? They don't exist by way of their own nature, right? Well, I mean, to put it simply, they arise due to causes and conditions, right? They're not self-existent. Nor are they in the nature of mind, right? So they're separable from the mind. They're like clouds passing through the sky. There's a cloud, any given cloud is not in the nature of mind. I mean, it's not in the nature of the sky. It's a adventitious thing that arises in the sky, and rain comes and it's not in the sky anymore. So anyway, the mental afflictions are not in the nature of your mind, right? The nature of the mind is something deeper than that. So the realm of sentient beings is not tied to the shell of the afflictions. That's really important. Right? So it means the realm of yourself, of you're a sentient being, right? Is not tied to the mental affliction. So that, if you think I'm a angry person, or I'm a prideful person, or I'm a desirous person, or an ignorant person, like, you're not tied to that. That's not tied to you. That's temporary. Whatever mental afflictions you have, we all have mental afflictions if we're in samsara, but our mental afflictions they're not in our nature, we're not in their nature, right? It's like, what's the word? It's like a guest who came to your house, and yeah, you didn't kick them out yet. Actually, a better way to say it is like a guest who came to your house, so you need to kick out, but you haven't kicked them out
The
yet.
man who came to dinner.
Yeah, to tell them that it's a guest who you need to ask to leave. In this simply show. And then it says, existing since beginningless time is the nature of the mind. Emptiness of true existence, right? That's what you were getting, right? It's the Buddha nature, right? Existed since beginningless time in the nature of mind, and it is the emptiness of true existence, right? Since beginningless time is the Tathagata essence free of defilements, right? So that's what that's getting out there, that that nature of mind, that ultimate nature of mind is, as it says, has it always existed. That's why it was there when you were an insect, actually, right? And were born as an insect, it was there. When you were in the hell realms, it was there. When you were, whatever, feeling angry, it was there, and it's there right now. And as it says here, it has existed since beginningless time. It is the nature. It's the ultimate nature of your own mind, actually, right? So an ultimate nature means what? It's the essence of your mind. It's inseparable from your mind. Just as like form is empty and emptiness is form in the Heart Sutra, right? The ultimate nature of your mind is this, and this is the, and so on. And then it says, and since the beginningless time, that ultimate nature of your mind has been free of defilements. So even as the defilement, and you get the point there that just something to, again, contemplate, is that even while the defilements are present, they don't stain the ultimate nature, is what this is suggesting. And that's worth contemplating, because and part of the point here is Maitreya at the beginning of the Uttara Tantra, this text said, this is difficult to understand, right? How is it that you can be overwhelmed with mental afflictions, and at the same time, the ultimate nature of your mind is unstained by mental afflictions? And both are happening. And he says, that's difficult. You know, Maitreya said at the beginning, that's difficult to understand. So he's been presenting, right, these different aspects of Buddha nature, these different similes for Buddha nature, to help us understand something difficult that he said was difficult to understand, which is that both can be true at the same moment, and are true, not just can be, but are true at the same moment. And so it's something for you, I mean, again, and Maitreya is presenting all this for you to contemplate it in your own experience and say, wow, is that true? How is that true? Wow, really? Is there something in the nature? Is my ultimate nature of my mind unstained right now?
Real quick question
Sure.
that we can talk about next. But is ignorance equated to unconsciousness, unawareness, on not having, I mean, not that it doesn't exist, but you're so caught up in the whole thing that it would never even occur to you consciously. And this goes on, that essence is attainable, or you could even talk about it. Is that, am I articulating that well enough? Because I'm trying to really, the word ignorance itself, I guess now I want to know what the.
I'll say something very brief, and then we can you ask it again next time.
Yeah.
But I'll say something very brief, and then next time if you want more, we can say more. But in general, I mean, there are lots of explanations about ignorance in Buddhism because it's the root of samsara. But sometimes it's summarized in two parts, I guess, where they say one type of ignorance is ignorance about the conventional nature of things.
Right.
And that would be like, for example, not understanding that, I'll give you a simple example. Not understanding that hatred causes suffering for yourself and others. That'd be an ignorance about the conventional nature of things, right? Very simply, but there are many other, countless kinds of ignorance about conventional natures of things. And then the primary ignorance that's sort of, that is often emphasized in Buddhism, for example, ignorance of the teaching of karma is a conventional, you know, that's taught about. So, but then there's there's an ignorance that's the deepest cause of samsara, and that's ignorance regarding the ultimate nature of things. And that's where, in brief, like that's an ignorance. So the ignorance regarding the ultimate nature of things is when you perceive something, yourself, an object, or something else, and it appears to you as though it exists independently, or exists inherently, or exists intrinsically, you can say it different ways. And then you don't refute that appearance. You accept a wrong appearance. You accept it appears to you in a way that's not how it exists, and you accept that appearance, you grasp at that appearance. There are different ways to say it. That's the ignorance. That's the ignorance of the ultimate nature of things. And then based on that, you could then get all kinds of
That's
examples.
helpful. I guess I'm talking about the ignorance of the conventional.
Okay.
I mean,
And there are
thinking
countless
about,
variations.
yeah,
Yeah, you
no,
get it. There are all kinds of variations.
yeah. I will have to.
And I know we've and two quick points before I start. One is, and then we'll do the dedication. One is there was already one class scheduled for July, and I'll send out soon a schedule for another class in July and two in August. I'll do that soon. And the other is for folks who are doing the online. I'm gonna say Jan, who's right here, is gonna create a new link. So as of now, this is the last class using this link, and so by July, actually in the next couple of weeks, I think Jan said there will be a new link. It'll go up on the website. It'll go out in the email. It'll sort of be posted everywhere.
You can use it.
And you can use that one for the rest of this class series. But I just don't want people to be confused. So this link will no longer, after today, this link won't be used anymore because there is a new Zoom account from the center. So it'll be through the new Zoom account. But starting starting next class, there'll be always a new Zoom, a different Zoom link, and that'll be the one for the rest of the classes. So don't use this one because you'll be confused. But yeah, the new one will come out quite soon, well before the July class. So it'll be out there on the website and everything. And then we should do the dedication. So the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In this snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled totally empty from their own side, so that the I, who is merely labeled totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled totally empty from its own side, nor lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled totally empty from their own side, the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. Lastly, just last dedications, may all of us who are studying and contemplating this text by Maitreya, Buddha, be able to realize the ultimate nature of our own minds, and uncover, like that, using that metaphor, to uncover the golden statue hidden beneath the clay. So may we be able to have success in seeing the nature of our mind and using it to benefit ourselves and others. Well, thanks very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
See you in July.